Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Christine Barnhart. She's the Senior Director at Infor for Supply Chain Strategy. Christine, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So Christine, first of all, supply chain is something that's been in the news a lot lately. Some people are aware of it, some people aren't. Can you give us an idea of what your role is as someone in the private sector working on supply chain, especially when you're working with the government?
Absolutely. Well, for me, I kind of grew into supply chain. I'm an engineer by education, spent 12 years at Whirlpool doing traditional manufacturing and product management, never really even knew what supply chain was at the time, even though I was working with supply chain professionals until I actually made a career change and went to Mead Johnson Nutrition, planning like infant formula, and really discovered that supply chain is a bit of the glue that really holds businesses together. It enables them to make products, buy materials and supplies, and actually get them to market. So was really lucky when I landed at Infor just a few years ago as an industry expert and really the voice of the customer internally. So I don't consider myself a traditional technologist. I'm really a practitioner at heart. And in my role, I get to really push us to solve problems better, more efficiently, bigger problems, if you will, for our customers.
Great. And, the Biden administration recently came out with an executive order that really looks at supply chain management and what these agencies should be doing for it. The agencies are now developing their plans and those sorts of things. So what have you taken away from this executive order? What's really the highlights that companies and consultants and agencies should take out from this executive order?
So a couple of things. One is I just think it's exciting that at the presidential level, we're even utilizing the term supply chain, right? Because pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, even my family didn't really have a clue of what I did. So I think that that's really exciting. It kind of brings it to the forefront. But beyond that, the key theme and really everything that's coming out of the executive orders is about resiliency. How do we make our supply chains less fragile, more resilient? It's not so much about isolating us from the rest of the world, but really taking out some of the risk and making sure that we're able to be self-sustaining, at least for a period of time, and that we're able to support critical groups, critical components, whether it be, large batteries for, electric vehicles or pharmaceuticals or minerals and mining and things of that nature. So I think it's really exciting that it's part of the conversation where I think previously there was just such a divide between public and private that we didn't really even talk to each other and we didn't understand how we were related and how we impacted.
And where does that, meshing or that area that you come together, where does that work well right now, especially since supply chain we've seen it. I mean, we all had the toilet paper shortage at one point. There was something that we could all point to that was a supply chain issue. So, where does it come together between government and industry, and how can they work together better?
So I think the biggest thing has been around visibility. And we saw this with like Operation Warp Speed, right? When we were really trying to mobilize on vaccine development and distribution, which was this acknowledgement that things are moving within a supply chain, but nobody really knows where they're at. When are they going to be there? When is it going to be available? When am I going to have it? So I think that was kind of the first key, which was investments by a number of companies in the private sector supporting Operation Warp Speed in terms of visibility, in transit visibility, visibility into my suppliers. And then we've really seen it kind of grow from there with the Build Back Better, which says, you know what, we need everybody working together. We need to have more transparency in terms of what's happening within the supply chain. And we saw a lot of these trends even pre-COVID, right? We saw it in that food and beverage space, where people were really requesting transparency. I think now we really have the strength of the U.S. government behind those initiatives. And I think it's really helpful to see, tax incentives and other things to really help companies, kind of get over that hump, because we are talking about investment beyond the traditional kind of ERPs into more advanced supply chain tools.
So I wanted to move back a little bit to that executive order. What might this order bring to private companies and also to agencies? Is what kind of policies might we see come out of agencies from this, and how can they help? How can they help companies keep their supply chains robust and helping to stay with the customers as much as they want to?
So I think a big one, as I said before, are incentivizing companies to make investments for better resiliency, better transparency, more communication company to company. I think beyond that, then you'll also see not necessarily edicts, but strongly encouraged policies to say, this kind of data must be available. You must be able to provide it really at a moment's notice. And then beyond that, I think another big push will be, currently we have these multi-enterprise business networks. They haven't been well adopted across supply chain generally on a global nature. And what we've seen as a result of just COVID in general, but then government policies and even just government research, is a real push to build better commerce networks, collaboration networks. And so I think you'll see a lot more investment in that area as companies, they recognize, I really have to have this, right? Especially in kind of the core focus industries that are really being looked at right now.
Are there any certain agencies that are taking additional steps? I know that the Defense Department certainly has had their own supply chain issues and reports and things like that coming out. Are there certain areas that in the government that they're pushing a little bit harder on this?
All of the above.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think, what we're seeing, first and foremost really is about kind of core defense, the materials that are needed so that our military runs efficiently, right, and has the supplies that they need. And then the other, I think, core area that we're seeing is really from FDA and USDA. So one, really trying to have a more robust pharmaceutical industry and pharmaceutical network. The other, really investing and making proposals in terms of food safety, and food security. And when you think about it, like if you think about the pyramid of needs, right? I need security, right? I need a roof over my head, and I need clothes, and I need food. And beyond that, I think, other areas will follow, but probably not as quickly.
What can companies begin doing to work better with the government at this point? You talked a lot about data, you talked a lot about just communication. How can they prepare?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think often we don't even think about, should we even be interacting with the government until there's some type of an emergency. And, my hope is with Build Back Better that we'll see kind of this joint partnership as we move forward, because it really benefits everybody if we're leveraging our resources, whether they be public or private, more cooperatively. So, we are seeing commerce networks being stood up. We are seeing, I think, a lot more interaction than I've witnessed in my lifetime, where, the different agencies within the federal government are reaching out to the subject matter experts in, the various industries and in supply chain in general, and they're asking for opinions. How do we get this done? What's best practice? I haven't experienced that level of sharing or cooperation in my 20 some odd years. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm sure there were great people talking to each other, but it's just more visible now.
Is there amount of data, now that we have this sort of data available to, through cloud sharing and all that sort of things, that companies should be keeping on to ensure that they can have the things that the government might need or the things that they might need to better their supply chain?
Yeah, I actually think it's more about what insights you glean from the data than it probably is the data necessarily itself. I mean, most companies have data retention policies, and that data is great. But I think what really helps supply chains be more resilient and more robust is when your execution systems are able to leverage that data to give you insights, to give you actions that help you, make decisions better, faster, more robustly. And that's really the shift that we're seeing. Is traditionally supply chain was very linear. We planned, we sourced, we manufactured, we delivered. And, we were already starting to see kind of a shift. I think COVID has accelerated this shift to, real-time inputs, real-time data, and really a continuous supply chain where we're planning and we're sensing and we're sourcing and we're executing really very, very quickly in real time. And I don't see that trend slowing down. I think it's only going to accelerate. And I think the policies that are coming forward will help to do that. So I'm pretty excited.
We're going to take a quick break. My guest today is Christine Barnhart. She's the Senior Director at Infor for Supply Chain Strategy. I'm your moderator, Scott Maucione, on Federal Insights, Protecting the Federal Supply Chain, sponsored by Infor on Federal News Network.